Hi, my name is Jeff Pagano, and welcome to a special pod where we plan to look ahead to the 2025 Women's Six Nations. And I have the perfect guest joining me. She runs the excellent Irish Women's Rugby Supporters Club account on BlueSky, and she's also planning her own podcast over the coming weeks. This is her sixth appearance on our humble pod. A warm welcome back to Ailbhe.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Great to have you. Well, first of all, let's start talking about your new podcast venture and tell us all about it. I see you dropped some branding on social media just today, so tell us what you have planned.
Yeah, we just dropped the big secret, I suppose. It's something that I've been talking about for a long time, and if I'm honest, I was hoping somebody else would do something about it, but nobody
Yeah.
was. And there was a few people who bullied me a little bit, and I eventually said, right, we've got to pull the trigger on this. I think it was important for me personally, anyway, to have a women's only kind of a space. There's a lot of podcasts like yourself that do great work talking about the women, but the primary focus tends to be the men. So
Hmm.
I think a women's only space is kind of, there's a gap there, there's a hole to really fill, to be honest. So for some reason I'm doing it.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it sounds great, and you dropped the name of it. It's Mother Rucker, the Irish Women's Rugby Podcast, and it's a great name. And listen, when do you have a date when you might be starting it?
Yeah, we're going to launch it the week before, so just a few days before the first game. So the Women's Six Nations kicks off on the 22nd of March.
Yep.
So just after the men finish up. So we'll launch it probably 2 or 3 days before that. I suppose, depending on when we can fit in and around our lives, really. But yeah. So we'll
All
be
about
dropping
that.
it on the usual podcast platforms. But really looking forward to it. We kind of hummed and hawed about the name, and something went back and forward several times. And it's myself and Cian Wilnor that are doing it. So
Oh, I think I know his work from somewhere.
I think you've heard
It
of
sounds
him.
familiar.
Yeah. I think you might know him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Now we should have some hopefully big guests lined up. We won't drop any names of that just yet, but a little bit of a teaser there.
no problem. Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, we'll be putting all the links in the program notes to your site and to your account, so you can keep track on that as well. So that's brilliant. Best of luck with that. Okay, so listen, since we have you here, we might as well, just want to have a quick chat about well, basically, how the Irish women's season has gone so far. I mean, going way back to, I think was it August was the Interpros.
Yeah.
The Interpros like begin and end before the men's Interpros even begin. And I was watching this thing on Leinster Rugby. Have been dropping this series of videos on the Leinster team, and talk about players and stuff like that. And it's a great it's a great documentary about what it's like for them. It just seems a shame that they only play for 4 or 5 weeks, But the Interpros is essentially the way the women's season starts.
It is. It depends on the season, really.
Yeah.
So it's one of these funny things that it's with women's rugby, things tend to dance around the season a little bit. And the Interpros is something that's not really had its home in the season. It's been kind of working around things like the Six Nations, like the WXV competition, Celtic Challenge, all of these things. But there's a lot of movement going on in women's rugby at the moment because there's a lot of development. So it has danced around the calendar. We've had it in the summer, we've had it in January, we've had it in September, we've had it all sorts of different times of the season. But it seems to be one of those things that, there's been a lot of debate over what purpose does it really have?
Mm.
Does it fit in the pathway? No, not really. Does it matter? A lot of people say no, because there's a love of it, be it from players and from fans. It's an opportunity for players who kind of slog it out in the AIL to stick on a Leinster jersey, Munster, Connacht, Ulster, and there's a certain tribal passion that comes with that.
Mm.
And so it's one of those things that, you don't want to kill off because it's a great competition.
Yeah.
But there hasn't really been room to really expand it and build it into the pathway yet. I think, the thought was that we would build on it, that it would become a bigger competition. That hasn't happened, and we've moved in the direction of the Celtic Challenge, which is the first cross-border women's competition, where there are two teams from Ireland. So it's, I suppose, an amalgamation of Munster and Connacht, which is the Clovers, and then we have the Wolfhounds, which is Ulster and Leinster. And the view is that in future it will be four provinces that are playing. But I suppose the competition is very much in its infancy at the moment, and we play against Edinburgh and Glasgow, and then two teams from Wales as well, Breton Thunder and Gwalia. So there's, there's room to build into four provinces, but for now the provinces are kind of sticking to the format of the Interpros, and yeah, it's a great competition. It tends to be somewhat predictable, I think,
Mhm.
in that it's either Munster or Leinster really fighting for it.
Yeah.
But we've seen huge improvements from Connacht and Ulster over the years. Particularly in these last 2 years, I think Ulster have some phenomenal young talent that are coming through. And yeah, it's good to see, I suppose. Hopefully, that'll even up a little bit and we can field those four provinces in a cross-border competition in future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line because, I mean, like on the one hand, if you're preparing for the Six Nations every year, to have the two teams, it is good, because it concentrates the talent at the top, I suppose, a little better.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, if you're looking for a competition where you can get buy-in to public support to go see them, I mean, you've got the branding of the four provinces is right there, and you've got the fans want to put on the jerseys as well, and
Mhm.
it's something. It's definitely something that's going to have to be looked at. And like, I mean, we've been following the Celtic Challenge. And it is an interesting competition at the moment. You do have the Wolfhounds and the Clovers kind of almost dominating at the top, but I think it's
Mhm.
Gwalia Lightning as well, and the two Irish teams still both have to play them in the last couple of weeks, so it's going to be an interesting finish. So it's like you say, it's progress, and every season they're adapting it to see what happens. And just in terms of that, you mentioned the AIL, the women's AIL. I mean, that's always been a feeder into the national team and the provincial teams over the years. I mean, you always like going up to recently, you would have always had players from the test teams lining out in the AIL during the season, which you don't see in the men's game. And it's like when you see the AIL, I think there's usually four teams dominating there. It's Railway Union, UL Bows, Rock, and Belleville. But the women's league, it's expanding. It's still expanding a bit. They're adding teams and stuff. Is that still relevant? Is it still being expanding in its own right?
It is and it isn't. So, I mean, the AIL has been the grassroots of women's rugby in Ireland, and like you say, we would have players that were going straight from an AIL club setup right into the Irish team, which worked quite well over the years. But I think with the emergence of the Celtic Challenge, most of the top talent has exited the AIL and is now playing with their Celtic Challenge teams, and the Celtic Challenge this year was expanded as well, so it's now a 10-game season,
Mm-hmm.
which sees a lot of those top elite players no longer playing in their clubs, which is very difficult on the clubs. It really left a kind of a gaping hole behind them, which for some clubs was relatively easy to fill because they would have depth in terms of their J1s and even J2s teams. But for other clubs that don't quite have that depth, it really left them, I suppose, hanging a little bit and searching for solutions. I mean, leaving a hole behind does allow more players to kind of come up from smaller teams and to get a bit more experience. But I think, there was a little bit of politics in terms of why players are being just hoisted out and no solutions were being offered
Mm,
by the union. But I think AIL will always be relevant in some way.
yeah.
But where it fits in the pathway is, I suppose, yet to be determined, particularly while we're in such flux at the moment, in terms of the development of women's rugby and domestic rugby and elite rugby, for the women. But there's definitely a relevance there. We are seeing, though, the impact of that kind of transition of players from the AIL to the Celtic Challenge, in that we're seeing, kind of hockey scores at times.
Mm,
And it's not just hockey scores between, the top two and the bottom two. We're seeing, mid-table 56 nils and
mm-hmm.
56 sevens and, scores like that, all the way up to Railway beating Tullow. Tullow were just new to the AIL this year. Railway beating them 106 nil.
Yeah.
Cook losing to Bows 94 nil.
Hmm.
And the victors on both those sides being the away team at the time.
Mm.
So it's hockey scores don't serve anybody. And
Yeah.
over the years, I've seen several calls to, I suppose, kind of hamstring those big teams that are putting up hockey scores on other teams and saying, oh, they shouldn't be putting out their best players for these games. They should be doing God knows what to try and, create a competition that's more competitive. But I think that's the absolutely wrong approach. The
Mm.
likes of Cook, the likes of um, Ballincollig, Tullow, they should be given the resources
Yeah.
really build into that and narrow that gap. Why hinder the good teams, the really, really talented teams, build up to that? That's what we should
Yeah.
be aiming for and pushing them on. And when it comes to the Six Nations, we're not saying that England should be, putting on the brakes. We
Yeah.
we, we don't say that they should be holding up. We've
Oh, you want to
seen
bring everyone up to that standard.
absolutely, and
Yeah.
in the men's game, we've seen the All Blacks beating teams by 100 odd in the World Cup, and we don't say, they should pass the ball forwards a few more times. No, of course not. We
Yeah.
want to see the best be the best, and build up to that. But yeah, I think the AIL is suffering a little bit because of all of that flux. I hope it'll improve. I hope they'll continue to resource it, because it's loved by players and fans.
Yeah.
It's the likes of UL Bows, the likes of Rock and Railway and Belvo, Galwegians. These are all teams that have been playing for years and have funneled players into the Irish setup. You can't kill off that kind of
Mm.
a legacy, a history, and a passion, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and of course, I think it was even just last season where you even had games were postponed because there wasn't a ref or teams just didn't have enough players because there was other competitions competing with it. I mean, hopefully they'll address that. I mean, it shouldn't be happening now in 2024, 2025, but at the
Hmm.
senior level, but hopefully they're getting there. But listen, moving on to the senior team now, and
Hmm.
the progress that we've had. I mean, since when I started chatting to you, you started coming on, it was when that disastrous time when we didn't qualify for that World Cup. It was the lowest the Irish team could have been. I mean, we had a bottom finish in the Six Nations as well since then, but it has been an upward curve kind of since then,
Definitely.
results wise, no doubt about that,
Hmm.
performance wise, and that kind of culminated in a top three finish, which put us into the WXV1, the top tier competition. And of course, we had before that we had a big win over Australia, and that's the 150 match. I think that was Belfast, wasn't it?
Hmm.
And then went on to Vancouver and those famous wins over New Zealand and the USA. I mean, that must have been huge for the women's sport, and just to show what this team can actually do.
It's been a massive turnaround in a very short space of time. Like you said, 2, 3 years ago, we were in a position where we were getting wooden spoons in the Six Nations. We didn't qualify for a World Cup, which was the first time in the history of the competition that we hadn't qualified for it. We were, I suppose, what I hope would be our rock bottom. Um, but we've absolutely driven on since then. We've seen a lot of players leave the setup. We've seen a lot of experience draining out, but we've seen other players like the likes of Clean Maloney coming back into the setup.
Yeah.
Hugely talented player, a real leader on the pitch, and somebody who leads by example. And then we've seen the influx of a lot of young players getting a lot more experience and, doing it at top level, really, within the Six Nations. And then, like you said, moving into the WXV competition. Um, it's been a massive turnaround. I remember counting up going into the Six Nations, I think 2 years ago, how many caps we as a team had. And I'm talking about the starting 15. We had less than 110 caps, I think, across 15 players. And the English team had players who had over 100 caps each, and it was just, with that kind of lack of experience, you can't expect to perform at top level. But we've seen that experience coming in, and the last Six Nations, I think we were up to 300 caps. So we were building towards something, definitely. I think coming third in last year's Six Nations, I think I'm still in shock.
Hmm.
You know, having gone from wooden spoon, you think it's going to be a slow build back in.
Yeah.
But we just, I don't know, we just pulled performances out. We have had a lot of, particularly in the last year, we've had a lot of the 15s players coming into the setup, or a lot of the, sorry, the sevens players
Seven.
coming into the 15 setup, um, which the benefit has been immense. It's been absolutely wonderful to see. You know, the likes of Aaron King, who's still a very young player, incredibly talented 15s player, not played much, or not, sorry, sevens player, not played much 15s rugby. She played some underage 15s rugby for Nace, I think a little bit for Belva, but not a whole lot. And my God, did she take the competition by storm in
Yep.
the WXV? She was just incredible. So we've had a lot of building from, I suppose, a lot of different facets, whether it's drawing the sevens in, whether it's getting the some of the experienced players back, whether it's building experience with younger players and newer players. And it's really been a very quick turnaround, a shockingly fast turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about the 15s v sevens.
Mm,
It's a sort of almost it's almost like a conflict within the women's game because it's like
mhm.
where do you put the bulk of the talent? And I suppose we've seen the sevens team do really well. They won a leg last year. I think it was
Mhm.
down in Perth, and but now you've got a situation where it's a World Cup year in the 15s. And it seems like that they want to keep the 15 squads together. Makes perfect sense. Now, obviously, the sevens has been a disastrous for both the men and the women this
Yes.
season. But it's just a question of finding the right balance. But I suppose we're building towards a World Cup, so I suppose that's the right way to do it. I suppose.
It is and it isn't. I mean,
Yeah.
in short term, absolutely. When you've got a limited resource pool, that's absolutely the way to do it. What we would want to see is building a much deeper resource pool, and not having to share those resources.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'd like to see really deep pathways that are really established, and you get young players from, you know, under 12s and clubs all the way into their senior setup, into whether it's provincial or, you know, some other sort of an elite club setup, and then into international. And you know, that's very unclear at the moment. Hence why we're having to share those resources across the 15s and the sevens. And like you said, the sevens are really, really suffering at the moment, and the 15s are doing incredibly well. 2 years ago, we saw the sevens doing very well and the 15s at rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
My fear, unfortunately, is that post World Cup this year, we're going to see that again. You know, I'm not sure if the focus will be as hard on the sevens going forward. I know the sevens was really David Nucifor's baby.
Yeah.
It was something that was very important for him and the likes of Anthony Eddy. It was very much a focus for them, but I don't think it's as much so for David Humphreys. I think the 15 setup is far more his focus. And it would certainly be, as a fan, my focus as well. But whether the players who have the dual contracts or who play across those two codes, I don't know what their opinion will be on it, whether they'd prefer the 15s or the sevens or to be able to do both. I'm sure they'd love to be able to continue to do both. But I think we could see, you know, us building up to the World Cup, peaking at the World Cup, which is absolutely what you want. But what comes after that?
Yeah. You don't want to go off a cliff after that.
Exactly. And Scott Beemand is going to finish up at the end of the World Cup as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
likely he's going to move on. I don't know if they could convince him to stay or not. That's you know, not something I'm privy to. It would be incredible because he's had phenomenal success. But I think, you know, the cycles that they talk about in the men's rugby, where you build towards your Rugby World Cup year and then you have a transition period the year after. I think in women's rugby, you have kind of feast or famine. You've got people caring about it in the last 2 years, coming up to World Cup, and then after the World Cup, it's just it's real famine when it comes to the resources that are supplied by the unions. We even see it in, the Black Ferns coming up to the last World Cup. There was talk about, are they going to have enough resources there? Are they going to be able to peak? Are they going to be able to compete with England? And then last minute, we see these incredible coaches coming in and we see investment from the union and they go on, they win a World Cup. And then afterwards, oh, it dies off a bit again.
Mm.
So it's great that we are in the World Cup. I am absolutely overjoyed. I can't wait to see what we do. I hope we really hold our own.
Mhm.
I just hope that, the powers that be really see the value in it after that as
Yeah,
well.
keep the momentum going.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. Well, let's have a look at the Six Nations, which is coming up
Hmm.
now. Like you say, it starts on March the 22nd. We start now. The fixtures don't go the way the men's do. It's
Hmm.
so which is fine. We start a tough one. It's at home to France. It's up at the Kingspan Stadium. And that
Hmm.
actually, if I'm right, that's a potential preview of what could be a World Cup quarterfinal. The way that draw pans out. But listen, how do you see the squad shaping up, and what kind of what players we be looking out for?
I think, yeah, I think it's a great opening match, to be honest. And I
Yeah.
think, being at home to France is fabulous and is a real opportunity given the narrowing of that gap. I think for us to beat France would be an upset, but it's not, I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility.
Yeah.
I think we have some very, very strong players. Unfortunately, we're not going to see Sam Monaghan.
Yeah, that's a
She's
big
not in the
club.
squad this time round. But again, we will have the likes of Aoife Wafer, who is just, I don't know how she didn't win World Player of the Year. I'm ever so slightly biased, but my God, did she have some
No.
year last year?
Yeah.
She's she's a player who's always had this potential. She had a few injuries, I suppose, in the last 2 years. She's still, I think she's 22 now. She's still incredibly young, but my God, is she a powerhouse of a
Yeah.
player? You know, if any of the fans of the men's game are listening, I think it would be like getting, a little bit of David Wallace mixed in with Sean O'Brien, bit of CJ Stander. Like she
It's
is,
it's it's her it's her attitude. I
yeah.
mean, she's got the ability and all that to burn, but it's
Hmm.
her attitude with it as well. She'll just take it and just go straight at you. It's
Absolutely.
it's just an amazing, it's just amazing watch.
Yeah, she's an incredible carrier of the ball, but she's also a really good reader of the game. She
Yeah.
knows where to be and where to hit, and great at spotting those mismatches. She's not capable of going backwards. She
Hmm.
doesn't know how to go backwards, only forwards. And my God, she'll hit a wall. And we saw her in the WXV against the Black Ferns, and she carried three players over the line with her.
Hmm.
There was no stopping her from 5 meters out. And I'd rather try stop a train than try stop
Yeah.
her. She's
Absolutely.
phenomenal. Then other players to look at would be the likes of Erin King, who we've already spoken about. A number of the sevens, Amy Lee Costigan, incredible player. I see Stacey Flood is in the squad again, so we've had a little bit of kind of, you know, bit of flux again at 10 for the Irish women. It's been mainly Dana O'Brien, who has been a very good player, but at times I wonder about her confidence. I think she's a fabulous player from the boot. I'm not too sure how good she is at kind of hitting the line. She's still yet to prove herself. Stacey Flood, who's mainly a sevens player but has played at 10 for Ireland, I think is a more natural 10, is a more natural playmaker for me. So I don't think we'll see much of her at 10, but I'd like to see a bit of her at 10 as well. I think we have an incredible back row looking at this competition, to the point that I'd find it really, really difficult to pick a back row. Fantasy team kind of stuff. You're looking
Mm.
at, six or seven incredible players. We have the likes of Aoife Wafer and Erin King. We have Adele McMahon, who's, the Irish captain. Phenomenal players. But then pushing for places, we have the likes of, well, Brittany Hogan is more than likely, our starting eight. And then we have Dervin Nicoverd, who's again an incredible carrier of the ball, very clever player, very quick as well, great at creating opportunities. So we have a huge amount there, and then we've Grace Moore as well. There's a wealth to choose from. I don't envy Scott Beemand having to pick a back row from that
Yeah,
group of players.
yeah,
Um,
that's what you want. But yeah, it's a tough
Absolutely.
decision.
I think Aoife Dalton as well. Aoife Dalton
Yeah,
has been very, very good over the last 2 years. She's a really, really solid player.
yeah,
Defensively, her tackling is phenomenal. Looking forward to seeing a bit more of her. I feel that she's having a good season so far, so I'd love
yeah,
to see a little bit more of her. And then one to watch out for is our fabulous hooker, Neve, is just absolutely incredible as a tackler. She's just, she upends players. So I look forward to seeing a little bit of her as well. But then there's some young players coming into the side as well that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing. Some of the players who have really kind of slogged it out in the Celtic Challenge and even in the AIL this year. I'd be looking forward to seeing, a few fresh faces that are going to come in as well. Um, Katie Whelan in particular, who had wonderful intro-pros at 9 for Leinster. I can't wait to see a little bit more of her. I'd love to see her getting a spot at scrum half.
yeah. I mean, it isn't an interesting squad, and definitely a lot of players there. And in terms of the significance of this particular Six Nations tournament on the year as a whole, I mean, like last year, finishing third put us into that WXV1 competition. There were implications finishing in the top three.
Hmm.
Do we have a bit more scope this time to maybe to try more players, because it's more is this more of a like a because okay, go big for the first game against France, and
Hmm.
we have a chance for that. But then we're away to Italy. Then we've got England again in Cork as the third match, and then it's away to Wales and Scotland. Do the results have that much to them for the season? Obviously, you always want to do well in the Six Nations, but
Hmm.
do you see what I mean? Is it all with the World Cup in mind that they'll be approaching this, or will they just see how they are after it?
I know. I think that they'll definitely be looking to this competition to build on what they've already been doing. I think they will look to build in some depth in certain positions. I don't think, it'll be that this is kind of, sandbox competition stuff
Yeah,
only focused on the World Cup as being the major competition this year. I don't think any team, men's or women's, ever looks at the Six Nations as just a warm up to anything later in the
yeah,
year. The Six Nations in and of itself is a hugely important competition, and we will be looking to. I think we'll be looking to cement a lot of our style under BMAND. I think we'll be looking to build that depth, but I think we'll also be looking to build our confidence a bit. I think we're already on the up, given last year's Six Nations, given the WXV, like you said, that game against Australia, the 150th anniversary game. I think I think though we'll need to really be sure of ourselves. Those weren't blips, those were us building towards something.
hmm
I think if we were to have, a disastrous or even a particularly tough Six Nations, our confidence could be very badly knocked. And we don't want to do that. We want to keep that build going. We want to aim to peak just before the World Cup if possible. And this is as close to just before the World Cup as you'll get.
Absolutely. The World Cup kicks off at the end of August. We're in a pool with Japan, Spain, and New Zealand, and I think we're based in Northampton for the first couple of games, then
Mhm.
down to Brighton to play New Zealand. So it's really all to play for this year, and I really hope they go for it, and I hope that most of all the fans can buy into it, and just get involved, show your support, go to the games when you can. Like I say, the Six Nations, there's one in Belfast, there's one in Cork. Get to those games if you can. Go to local clubs, go to, follow the Celtic Challenge, all these
Mhm.
competitions. It's just the prospect of growing the game. It's immense. And like you mentioned, Scott Beeman, that's a
Mhm.
classic example. I mean, you're looking at ways where the IRFU can show that they're committed to the future of the women's game. Offering them a contract would be one way of doing it. Do you know what I mean? That'd be
Mhm.
one way of showing that we want a coach who's going to be with this, be able to bring this team on. So we'll see what happens in terms of. Very concerned with what you said about what might happen after the World Cup. Like
Mhm.
it might peak and then we'll just see a drop off. We don't want to see that. We want to see it keep moving up. Are you confident of there being progress past the World Cup, or what way do you see it?
I don't think anybody could be really confident, to be
Yeah.
honest, because the change in women's rugby, to be honest, it just takes a fresh face in at the top. I don't know what David Humphrey's thoughts on the women's game is. So far so good, but if interest is lost, if it's seen to cost too much, if the board don't really support it, it's the first thing to go. You
Mm,
know, it's where resources land last and disappear first, to be honest. So, I would hope that they wouldn't want to take a step backwards. When we were at rock bottom, the IRFU was getting a lot of very bad press, and for good
hmm.
reason.
Yep.
We don't want to go back to those days. As fans, we don't. The players certainly don't, and I hope the IRFU don't as well. And it's harder to build from rock bottom than it is to just keep building on something that's already established. We're at a point now where we're well off rock bottom and we need to keep that going. Hopefully, they see that and they will continue to invest and they will take it seriously. We see the likes of sponsors coming on board this year as well.
Yeah.
Just an hour or two ago, we see that Evoke is becoming involved with the women's team as a sponsor. I think Goodfellas Pizza was announced a few months ago. The market is there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the powers that be recognizing that the market is there. There's been a number of studies over the last few years about how you get the most bang for your buck as a sponsor by sponsoring a women's team, because it's not very costly to sponsor a women's competition or a team,
Hmm.
but you get a hell of a lot of exposure from it. And it's, in terms of return on the investment, it's very, very good. But it's just a matter of getting everybody aligned and thinking that, if there's one person that comes in and goes, women's rugby, that's it. It's gone. It's
Mm,
lost momentum again. It's not a risk that there is with the men's game. You see the likes of Welsh rugby really suffering at the moment, club rugby
hmm.
in particular. That's years in the making. That's not
Mm,
just somebody losing interest or the person with interest stepping aside. That's years of governance issues. For women's rugby, it can literally be the change of an opinion, change of a policy, strategy change, anything like that, and the women's rugby suffers. So I suppose we have to keep the pressure on a little bit as fans, and the sponsors will as well, and hopefully keep it going. What I hope is that a very good World Cup will feed into that.
yeah.
I think we've had an incredible year in 2024, into the Six Nations now, if we do well in the Six Nations and build into the World Cup. And I think the World Cup competition in the UK is going to be huge. What they're planning is a very different World Cup to what we had here in 2017.
Hmm.
What we had here was almost blitz-like, and that's
Yeah.
where women's rugby was at the time.
Yeah.
No,
Couple of weeks down at Belfield Bowl.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then up to the Kingspan for a few games as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same competition that it is going to be this year.
Mm,
2025 in England is going to be absolutely massive. And I hope it'll be an eye opener to a lot of the doubters of the game, that they will see the coverage, they will see the sponsors, they will see the energy around it, and hopefully kind of say, oh, we want a bit more of that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's about how you build on success. I mean, like you say, going into that World Cup in 2017, Ireland had already had success, and they've been
Hmm.
doing well at previous World Cups. But instead of just holding that up as a trophy and just leaving it there and just saying, "Listen, we're great now," and not investing and to build more, you have to keep the momentum going and build. So I hope they do, and I suppose we can help out. You're like, we cover women's rugby when we can. You've got your podcast starting. It's people engaging with those podcasts, showing that these sponsors that it's worth associating with the women's game, and you're going to get that kind of exposure time and time again. So hopefully it just keeps going on an upward curve. Okay, well, listen, we're going to leave it there, Ailbhe. Thanks very much for coming on. Best wishes to you and Keno on your venture. Remember, it's called Mother Rucker, the Irish Women's Rugby Podcast. Of course, left all the relevant links in the program notes. Best wishes to you, and we'll keep in touch. Hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks for talking to me.
No problem. Thank you. And thanks for tuning into this bonus pod. We'll be back to our normal schedule for the rest of the week. As ever, you can keep up with our content at linktree/Harpin On Rugby. Until next time, stay safe, everyone. Slán.